Philadelphia 76ers fans have absolutely lost their mind. With the dust of the NBA trade deadline beginning to settle and the buyout market starting to establish themselves, Philadelphia 76ers fans are clinging to the hope of a familiar face returning to this organization, with Ben Simmons being the point of discussion here. But I'm here to break down why this organization should have zero interest getting involved in the Ben Simmons business ever again, and why this just does not make any sense to me on any level. But to dive into how we got here, we do know that the trade deadline is complete at this point, and the next stage of roster movement is attacking through the buyout market. I will circle back to this later, but this has been a key portion of what the Sixers are focused on, that they created this flexibility, made a little bit of moves so they could be more active players, that there is more on the way here, and that is where Ben Simmons comes into this. So we did get this report from ESPN, Shams Charania here, who says, quote, "Sources tell me Ben Simmons, the three-time All-Star, and Brooklyn Nets are working on a potential contract buyout to make him a free agent." He mentions the Clippers and the Cavs as two potential names, with the Sixers not being a part of that conversation, and for good reason. But for Sixers fans out there, they do believe that this fairy tale ending could come to be back in Philadelphia once again, and I'm here to squash that notion. Now, as far as the outlook on Ben Simmons, both extremes in Philadelphia are too far. There are people who have a little bit of revisionist history for who this guy once was, that let's not forget he was a three-time All-Star. There was a point in time and when this guy was one of the premier defenders in the sport of basketball, the most athletic player on the floor, could fly up and down the court in transition, a high-level playmaker that did a lot for a team. A lot of the little things, was a winning player. But there's also a version of that player that continually got worse throughout his NBA career. The version of Ben Simmons that reached his peak is so far from the version of who he is now. If this was a guy who had developed any semblance of a jump shot, not even the three-pointer, any sort of mid-range game, any sort of offensive development, we're not having these conversations about him being a part of a buyout market. We're probably not having these conversations about the Sixers not making it past the second round. But that was the hurdle that he was unable to clear, and he is here as a result of it. And beyond that, the physical signs aren't even more concerning. This dude has not played more than 42 games in a season since he was wearing a Sixers uniform 4 years ago. He also, when you watch him on the court, does not have that same level of physical command in this. He is no longer the most athletic player on the floor. You can see sometimes that he looks stiff when he's attacking the basket or trying to go coast to coast. He's just not the guy that he once was, and that is not going to change as he's getting older. And when specifically talking about this Sixers team, frankly, they got enough of those guys. That we're talking about Joel Embiid, hoping and praying that he can stay healthy for some semblance of a season. Paul George, all we've had have been injury concerns since he came to Philadelphia, whether it be the knee injury, the two bone bruises that he suffered, the pinky injury that he's dealing with, a groin injury that he's battled. The injuries have been seemingly nonstop on this roster, and adding Ben Simmons to that certainly does not help your chances of changing that. Now, how do we get there in this overall conversation? There's a couple layers to it. For starters, Ben Simmons is absolutely trying to walk back, do a little PR image, and speak. He recently was on the Old Man and the Three podcast and said, quote, "I didn't appreciate the fans enough. The fans of Philadelphia are incredible." And while that is true, and I do appreciate him saying this, and I will note, for a guy that I think in the overall, I guess, wider sphere of hearing him talk is pretty disingenuous and self-serving in basically everything that he says here, this was something that it felt like he meant, that he wasn't just throwing out there. But how did he arrive at this conclusion? Because you forced your way out of Philadelphia and got sent to an organization without any sort of real fan base out there in Brooklyn. That's the reality of what happens. And while you obviously played your cards to get to that point, you don't really have the right, in my mind, to walk it back and have, feeling bad for yourself in this case. And once again, the root of everything that went down is still Ben Simmons. He's the guy who made the trade request. He's the guy who held out from this team. And he's the reason that it did not work from a basketball perspective, because he refused to get better. He refused to put the work in and get better, improve his game, add new layers. Take a look at Tyrese Maxey. Think about how night and day different he looks as a player from year 1 to year 5 currently. That he was a below 30% three-point shooter in college, put the work in, got the reps, and has been top 5 in three-point percentage in the NBA in 2 separate seasons in his career. Now, I understand this is an outlier as far as a elite 1% work ethic type guy, an elite 1% improvement. And to take it even a little bit step further, it's certainly true that he was undervalued in the draft process and did not get the respect that he deserved. But let's go to the other side of the coin and take a peek at Ben Simmons. He's in the exact opposite end of the spectrum. The 1% as guys that do not put the work in or do not have the work ethic or desire to get better. He wants the Hollywood lifestyle of basketball without the actual substance of what it takes to get there. But with all that being said, do want to circle back to the Sixers team because they do have a clear opportunity here. this focus at the deadline, flexibility is going to continually be the buzzword that is thrown at us by the Sixers organization. Now, this comes in a couple different levels here. There is quote unquote financial flexibility that applies and helps from a basketball sense. And there's also quote unquote financial flexibility that just directly helps the pockets of Josh Harris. And the Sixers did address a little of both in this. To speak about the actual basketball stuff and what matters, they did get below that first apron. And what does that mean exactly? What the appeal of them in the short term is that you do have a higher degree of access to the buyout market. Now, to summarize the deadline as a whole, do want to pull these up, that these are kind of the ultimate moves that did go down. They sent away Caleb Martin, sent away KJ Martin, sent away Reggie Jackson, and it had to release Pete Nance. They also sent out a 2026 first round pick. They had 2 draft picks in that particular draft, so not the biggest news there, and also were forced to send away 2 future second round picks. In came Quentin Grimes, Jared Butler, a 2025 second round pick, and 4 future second round picks, which do look like they're going to be pretty decent second round picks, pretty centered around the Suns and the Warriors in 27, 28, and beyond. So those have potential to be in the 30s type picks if things break in the Sixers' favor. And the bottom line is that these are nice pieces of currency that you could cash in at a later deadline. That sometimes draft picks are more about that than the actual player that they come. But at the current state of the Sixers team, it does prevent you a nice kind of couple different directions that you could go. If the focus is on adding young talent, you can take these amount of bites at the apple and swings to the plate that you can bring in this quantity of players here. Or if you are just a trade away, these are options that you do have. But the other key part of this was getting below that first apron. And why that does matter is you do have a higher degree of access to the buyout market here. Now, some of the names that have been mentioned that are potential buyout targets, Ben Simmons, of course, at the top of the list here. D'Angelo Russell, not a guy that I really see getting bought out. Malcolm Brogdon, also a guy that I don't particularly think is likely to get bought out, but you never do fully know here. Kelly Olynyk, Bruce Brown, Torrey Craig, Dennis Schroeder, Marcus Smart, all names that have been mentioned. And to lay out exactly how the buyout market works a little bit, basically it is a veteran closer to the tail end of his career that a team wants to do right by. That if you're on an organization that isn't going anywhere, or you were traded to a destination that you don't want to be, you cut them free, allow them to seek another opportunity on a roster that they want to help at, and really contribute to a contender is essentially the basis of this. Clear example would be Reggie Jackson, who was sent away in the Washington Wizards trade that netted the Sixers Jared Butler. By the way, still a big fan of Jared Butler and what he can bring to this team. Have talked about it in a couple other videos already, but I do think that was a win of a move there. Reggie Jackson, a guy that probably does not want to chill in Washington right now, that he wants to play a little bit more meaningful basketball than is going to be the case for the remainder of the season with all the young players there. And from an organizational standpoint, if you're the Wizards, you have no interest in Reggie Jackson stealing minutes from the young talent that you're trying to develop. This is a situation you want these guys to play through their mistakes, have ample opportunity on the floor. So it does make sense to basically go find somewhere else where you're more wanted and can contribute to a roster that makes sense. So from the Sixers' perspective here, what was key in opening up more optionality is they were able to get under that first apron, which made them eligible to not only attack the buyout market, but be able to offer more than just a veteran's minimum. And as SpotTrack quotes here, it says, under the current CBA, teams who are over the first or second apron are restricted from signing a player after a buyout whose previous contract was greater than the non-taxpayer MLE for the current season. This worked out in the Sixers' favor last year with Kyle Lowry. And I understand Kyle Lowry is a bit of a hot topic conversation. He's not a guy that, or I guess I'll phrase it this way, is his role on this Sixers team is certainly larger than it should be. But Kyle Lowry is still a pretty excellent addition through the buyout market. You're not going to be able to build a team through the buyout market. That is not the purpose of it. This is getting final touches on the roster, adding rotational pieces that could bolster a playoff performance there. And that is what Kyle Lowry has been to this Sixers team. And I will also point back to last season when he stepped in as the starting point guard. I understand, I think Kyle himself, if you had asked him to, did not expect to be in that large of a role for this Sixers team. But it also doesn't happen if DeAnthony Melton doesn't get hurt. And I think that gets lost in translation a lot here, that he would be playing a bulk of those minutes. And the reality is the Sixers had a chance at Kyle Lowry, who was at the minimum, I would still say competent. Certainly not winning you basketball games and has his limitations at this point in his career. There's no doubt. I'm not trying to stick up the guy to the fullest extent, but this was a window to provide talent that the Sixers otherwise would not have had. Now, this still comes with a lot of conversation that the root of a lot of this was purely saving Josh Harris' pockets. The luxury tax conversations, those have no impact on team building or access to contracts or anything like that. Now, this is not the season I'm going to be ultra brutal on Josh Harris. On one hand, if you have enough money to own the Washington Commanders and the New Jersey Devils here, you have enough money to pay the luxury tax. But then again, I understand this not being a season in which you're going all in, and it does feel like you're paving a little bit more of a long-term path than I expect to be the case here. But But we will see what the Sixers team ultimately decides to do as things currently stand, and recording this late Wednesday night after the deadline is officially settled. So it could be something that breaks a little bit before that. But currently they have 13 full standard rosters. They did sign Chuma Okeke to a 10-day contract. It will be interesting if Daryl Morey continues to feed in sort of this tactic of rotating through talent, getting a chance to really evaluate guys, see what they can bring before ultimately deciding what is the case there. I also think it's incredibly likely, and I'm hoping it's the case, that Justin Edwards is upgraded to a standard contract. But I just don't see a world in any of this in which Ben Simmons is an answer. To Ben, I don't have the hate in my heart at this point. I wish you the best moving forward, wherever that will be, but I do really hope it is not Philadelphia ever again. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Any thoughts on that? If this was the Ben Simmons of several years ago that I did believe could be out there on a regular basis, contributor as a rebounder, as a playmaker, running the fast break, we could have a different story. But unfortunately, I just don't think that guy exists anymore. And I think a lot of Brooklyn Nets fans would tell you that exact thing there. So drop your thoughts below if you would have any interest in this whatsoever. Any other comments you have below. As always, make sure you guys are smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. Drop a like on this video here, and I'll be back talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.